Growing up, I was raised in a home where, nominally we were Christian. My parents had kind of Baptist backgrounds, but we didn't go to church or anything like that. I was just kind of adrift in a world where God was maybe out there, maybe not. I didn't really know. To the point where in like fourth grade, I believed in the Greek gods because that was something to believe in. And then it was, later, around about junior high where I was first really introduced to a church, properly speaking. I'd been to services and stuff before, but this was the first time where a friend had actively invited me to come to his church and, come learn about Jesus. I started hanging out with this church. I was going there every Sunday, every Wednesday night for their youth program stuff. And ultimately, and it was kind of funny because church I was a part of was an a cappella Church of Christ, so that meant no instruments in worship. But they took us to a music festival called Agape Fest in Illinois, and there was a band, I think they were called Seventh Day Slumber. No idea if they're still around anymore. But they did this like altar call type thing during their set, and I was like, yeah, I believe in Jesus. I want to be with him. And so after that, I met with the youth minister and stuff for a couple of months and was later baptized, and, really came to own my faith. Not long after becoming a Christian, I thought, okay, well, what I want to do is I want to be, a preacher like the preacher at my church. And so I had all these plans of where I was going to go to school. A lot of those ended up falling through, but I still ended up going to a different school to, study initially youth ministry, and then it was to study the Bible and theology and stuff like that. And that took me through undergrad and grad school at that same institution, went off and did a PhD in theology. And in the midst of all that, started getting into notions about liturgy, notions about daily prayer, and really started to think there's something to all of this. And so after a variety of things that happened, including a cancer diagnosis for one of my twin sons who was born, who is now fine. I always have to make sure I say he was fine because people freak out. He's fine. Finally realized that where I belonged, where I felt most at home, was in the Catholic Church. And so that ended up with me getting a job at a Catholic high school, teaching initially literature, and then once I became Catholic, I started teaching theology classes, and now I'm the Dean of Academics at the Chesterton Academy of Notre Dame in Spokane, Washington. I was very fortunate that the Church of Christ that I was in, it wasn't actively anti-Catholic. It wasn't like Catholics are bad, Catholics aren't Christians. But it did say that most Catholics are probably just nominal Christians at best. But that there are a few who really believe in Jesus. And so that was pretty much my notion of Catholics and Catholicism. I didn't know very many Catholics growing up. I had one Catholic friend, and she was great, but, the most I really knew about her faith initially was she was terrified of the Da Vinci Code when it came out. So Catholicism it wasn't on the radar, not even a little bit when I first came to faith. Catholics who really had a real faith in Jesus, that was in spite of their Catholicism. All the trappings, which I didn't even know really what those were. I was so ignorant of Catholicism that I knew literally nothing about it, except that it happened in really big churches and that their weddings were super long, because I had to go to one when I was a kid. And that was it. So absolutely. I thought that it was in spite of their Catholicism that they were really good Christians. I was able to learn that I was wrong about Catholicism and actually learn things about Catholicism when I got to college and grad school, and got an opportunity to start studying the early church and the medieval church in particular. I was very fortunate that despite being at a university that was part of the non-denominational tradition that I was raised in, that it wasn't afraid of the Catholic Church, and in fact had a lot of sympathies for, or at least some of the professors had a lot of sympathies for, the Catholic Church and Catholic teaching. And so it was sitting in those classes and learning about what the earliest church was like, which is really kind of our whole shtick as Restoration Movement Christians, was trying to get back to the first century church, Well, I got to actually learn more of what that church actually looked like and what it looked like in the centuries that immediately followed. And while still at the time was more or less thinking, okay, but they went off the rails at a certain point or on certain issues, I still began to see very firmly that nevertheless, these people really knew what they were talking about, and the faith I have today wouldn't exist without them. And then over time, that had to give way to, well, if I think that they're right about the Trinity, if I think that they're right about who Christ is, if I think that they're right about things like theosis, then I can't simply write off what they have to say about liturgy, about prayer, about the Eucharist. I have to at least consider the fact that they saw these things as a united whole, that you couldn't take piecemeal from one another the way that I had been trying to do. And so that took many more years, all the way through my PhD, where theologically I was functionally Catholic, but not attending a Catholic church. I was still, well, at that point I was an Anglican, and then coming back to a non-denominational background. It took some more time to really come to grips with, if I want to be intellectually honest with myself, then I need to take that next step. So what finally led me to the church itself was, after my family had lived in the United Kingdom for 3 years and moved back to the United States, we went back to the non-denominational, Restoration movement churches that I had been going to for all of my teenage years, and young adulthood, and was really struggling with belonging there, and recognizing that all of these things that I'd been writing about, all of these things I had been discussing with colleagues and working toward, I needed to live those out more. Ultimately, what I really longed for was a combination of liturgy and the sacraments. And I needed both. It couldn't just be because I tried to help the church I was a part of become a little bit more liturgical. And I did. They did a Good Friday Stations of the Cross service that I helped them with. I did a series of reflections for them for Lent, one Lent. It wasn't enough, right? The liturgical aspects of it weren't enough. I needed the sacraments. And so it was in Advent of 2016 that I finally decided I need to start regularly attending a Catholic church and see if this is where God is calling me. And so I did. Every Sunday I would go to Mass in the morning, then I'd come home, eat a quick breakfast, and go to church with my family. And then that January, I finally made the decision that I need to be received into the church. And so I sat down and had a conversation with the pastor of the parish that I was attending, and it all just kind of went from there. So that Easter Vigil in 2017, I was received into the church.